Good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Dalal Hanna, and I am thrilled to be joining you today from unceded Algonquin territory to kick off the Freshwater Live program. This is a program that is going to bring us together a number of times over the course of the coming year and hopefully bring more freshwater into your daily lives. Before I say anything more, I want you each to close your eyes. Now, if you're finding it hard to keep your eyes closed, a good trick can be to just put your hands on top of your eyes like this. Now, I want you each to take a minute to picture whatever it is that the words fresh water mean to you. Spend a second there, keep your hands on top of your eyes. You're trying to picture what freshwater means. Okay, you can now open your eyes. So, for some of you, maybe the words freshwater make you think about a glass of delicious fresh water. For others, maybe the words freshwater make you think about a river or a lake that you can access from the city where you live. And maybe that's a big city like Toronto, where this picture was taken, and the mighty Lake Ontario borders the core of the city. Or maybe it's a river in a smaller city like Revelstoke in British Columbia, where the Great Columbia River flows. In my world, when I hear the words freshwater, I think about a lot of different kinds of places like the ones that you see on these pictures. And what brings all these places together is that they are bodies of water that aren't salty. Or in other words, they're not the ocean. Freshwaters are wetlands, lakes, rivers, streams. And even if freshwaters only cover just 1% of the Earth's surface, they are super important. Freshwaters contribute to our well-being as humans in all kinds of ways. For example, they provide us with drinking water. They also help prevent flooding. They provide food like fish that a lot of different people rely on. They're great places to go do recreational activities. One of my personal favorite recreational activities is to go canoeing, like you see on this picture. And of course, beyond thinking about how freshwaters contribute to our well-being as humans, they are also home to an incredible amount of biodiversity. They're home to fish, salamanders, turtles, frogs, insects, birds, and the list goes on because freshwater ecosystems are actually among the most diverse ecosystems in the world. Also, it turns out that whether or not you know it, you're probably pretty close to a body of freshwater right now. 50% of every single human being that lives on planet Earth is within 3 kilometers of a freshwater body. Now, to put that into perspective, 3 kilometers is really not that much. It's roughly the same distance as walking from one end of a big shopping mall to the other end and back only 6 times. That means that you can most likely fairly easily get from your house or your school to a body of freshwater. And maybe there are some pretty incredible ways that you already do or you could interact with that body of freshwater that's close to your home or your school. For example, one of my favorite things to do is to go out on the water and paddle. And this is a picture of me and friends doing just that on the river that was close to my old house in Montreal. Now, unfortunately, places like the one in this picture face some pretty important threats. Can any of you think of reasons why freshwaters might be threatened? How about you each take 20 seconds to think about that question? I'll start a timer to help us keep track of those 20 seconds. So you can either write down your ideas or just try and remember them in your head.
We could also, if you want, I can pick a few classrooms. We can get some answers right from the students.
That sounds great.
Perfect. All right, let's pick a few classrooms and see what they've come up with. Let's start off with our Fab 4-5, see if they have a couple threats to freshwater.
Garbage, pollution, garbage.
What's fish?
Wait, run. So, what do you mean when you say fish? Ah, we're on. Are we on?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're on. Who's got an idea for a threat that freshwater faces?
Go for it.
There can be like stuff in the water that can hurt other animals.
Okay. Things in the water that can hurt other animals.
Hen?
Plastic.
Yeah.
Plastic's a good one. Let's grab one more from your group.
And Athika?
Chemical.
Chemicals, yep. I have a couple in the private chat from our grade 6 class. They're saying pollution from oil, plastics as well. And then looks like our grade 6s from Kelowna are saying pollution as well. So those are some of the answers that came in from our classrooms.
Right. Thank you all so much for sharing these examples. And it's true that there are lots of examples of important threats to freshwaters. We talked about plastic, different forms of pollution. One class even put humans into the chat. And there are lots of human activities that do threaten freshwaters. There are lots of ways that humans are stewarding or taking care of freshwaters as well, which we're going to talk about more. But as much as I really hate the fact that all these different threats exist. I hate the fact that pollution exists and that plastic gets into our waterways. What I think is good about these threats is that we actually have agency over many of them. So tying back into the classroom that said the issue is humans, well, as humans, sure, we cause threats, but that also means that maybe we have some agency or power to stop those threats from taking place. What I mean by that is that we can adjust our actions. So for example, we can reduce the amount of pollution that finds its way into waters. We can do a better job at maintaining high quality freshwater habitat by reconsidering how we build our cities or our river edges. We can waste less freshwater by improving how we utilize freshwater. And one of the main reasons that I know all of these things about freshwaters, and in fact that I'm actually just here with you today sharing about freshwaters, is that I am a freshwater scientist. I lead a research group at Carleton University in Ottawa, in Canada, that works to figure out ways to help take care of our beautiful freshwater ecosystems. And I feel so lucky to be doing this work, but this work comes with some important challenges. One of those challenges is that to use science to try and find out more about how to care for freshwaters, we need information about freshwaters. But for so many bodies of freshwater, there's actually very little publicly available information about how they're doing. So as a scientist, one of the things that we often do is go spend time collecting information about bodies of water. And that's what you see me doing in this picture. I'm actually out at a stream using a net to collect insects in the bottom of the stream. And those insects, I'm in turn going to look at them in a microscope to figure out who they are and what they tell me about that stream, as well as the health of that stream. Still, there aren't nearly enough scientists like myself and other people dedicated to freshwaters to move as fast as we need to keep our freshwaters healthy. And this is where you and all of your classrooms come in. I think that we all have a role to play in finding out more about freshwaters and taking care of freshwaters. So this year, with your class, you're going to be visiting a local body of freshwater close to your school to collect information about how it's doing. You're going to be utilizing these really awesome kits developed by this Canadian organization called Water Rangers to collect information about your local body of water. And you're also going to be doing this cool thing called macro blitzing, which your teachers are going to tell you more about, and I am so excited to hopefully see some pictures of. Also, over the course of the next year, you and I and other people on the team that I lead are going to be connecting a number of times here online like this through different activities that we're going to do. This is a program called Freshwater Live, and your teachers applied to sign your classroom up for this program because you have some pretty awesome teachers that want to help you connect with freshwaters, which I think is really important. And I am so excited to be working with you over the course of this coming year because I really love freshwaters. I know how important they are. We need freshwaters. And I hope that by working together this coming year, I can share a little bit of my love for freshwaters with you. So one of the ways that we're going to kick off sharing this love is actually by taking you and your classes on a live field trip next week. Next Friday, we're going to tune back in here online together for myself and other people on our project team to take you on a real-time field trip to a site that we work at in Alberta. The people on the team that you're going to see over the course of this year include myself, a freshwater scientist, Jason Jacks, who is a filmmaker and photographer who does a lot of stories that are related to freshwaters. Ross Donahue is a map maker and our project website designer who knows all about mapping freshwaters. And Joe Grabowski is our program lead educator who has been working to bring freshwaters and other cool and important science into classrooms across the country for years now. And I'm so excited for this meetup that's going to take place next week. We're going to be joining you live from the field, showing you some of the tools that we use and the landscapes that we visit when it comes to doing freshwater science. I'm not going to say anything more for now because I want to make sure that we have lots of time to talk. So let us turn the mic towards you. I want to invite everyone, all of you, to ask questions about freshwaters that you'd like to share with others or that I can try and answer as we meet here today in this first kind of session to learn a little bit about freshwaters, which is the thing we're going to be doing together this coming year. And I'm pretty stoked about.
All right. So let me take down the presentation. Oh, there we go. And let's just say hi. We've got 1, 2, 3. We've got 4 classrooms with us, plus a 5th classroom who's joining us live on YouTube. So it's a pretty good start. And then, of course, we'll share the recording with the classrooms who couldn't make it directly in with us. But who do we have today? Let's say hi. We've got Miss Jenko's crew joining us from Toronto area, so here in Ontario. I believe we have Madame Provencher's class joining us from Quebec. We also, Miss Karakoleva's class joining us from Quebec today. We've got Mr. Vinster's class joining us, grade 6s from Kelowna in British Columbia. We've got Miss Sampson's crew in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. They're joining us online as well. And did I get everybody? 1, 2, I think. Oh, and then we have our group in Alberta, in Fort McMurray, Alberta, joining us as well, too. So very cool. We've got a nice spread across Canada here today. All right. So Miss Sampson, I know you're tuning online. If you have any questions, you can put them into the chat for us. Anything your students have about freshwater, I'll see them there. Same for Quigley class. If you put your questions into the private chat, I'll see them there. But let's start talking to our live groups and see if they have some questions. We can get some students and teachers on camera for us. So we'll start off with our grade 6s in Kelowna and see if they have some freshwater questions for us as we get started. There's everybody.
Nice.
Hey, grade 6s.
We've got our friends waving. Okay. All right. I would like, if anyone has a question, they can feel free to come on up and ask Mr. Gawrowski. Anyone have a question about fresh water? Lily, come on up.
Anything about water is fair game today.
Anything about water is fair game, so no bad questions.
We'll put them all on the spot.
Right there's good.
That sounds good.
What's your question, Lily?
Why is fresh water needed for fish? Don't they live in salt water as well?
You're right. Lots of fish do live in saltwater, and some fish actually live both in saltwater and in freshwater. Like, for example, salmon, which tend to be born in freshwater, and then they migrate all the way into salty ocean waters and migrate all the way back to the freshwater location where they were born to, in turn, themselves give birth to other fish. So you're right. Lots of fish live in the ocean, but lots of fish also live in freshwater and don't go to the ocean and really need freshwaters to survive. There are all kinds of different species. And I think one of the most cool things about freshwaters is that they are actually really sincerely one of the most biodiverse habitats on the planet. There are so many freshwater species, including freshwater fish. And I think, like, in a Canadian context, sometimes we may forget that. In a tropical context, there are often like many different types of species of fish living in the freshwaters. In the context here, there are still lots of different species of fish living in our freshwaters. All these little tiny fish that you may have never heard of, cichlids, cyprinidae, different types of fish that live in freshwaters that that's how they are. It's kind of like, why do humans not live in water? Because that's where we live. We breathe the air, and that's what we need to survive. And for many fish, what they need to survive is fresh water. And one thing that's kind of fascinating about fish is that they need fresh water that is in a particular condition to survive. And so this is where your classrooms going out and monitoring fresh waters becomes really important. because when we know more about freshwaters, we can better understand not only kind of what conditions do fish need to do well, but are there changes that are happening that might tell us, hey, we're on the cusp of a really big change and we need to take action to prevent this from happening. So things I'm thinking about, for example, like the temperature of water. If water gets too hot, there starts to be different amounts of oxygen in the water. And then the fish that actually do rely on oxygen, they breathe it in through their gills because there's oxygen that's dissolved in water, no longer have enough oxygen to survive. And so the temperature of the water really matters. Other things that matter in the water, for example, how much plastic is in the water? If there's a bunch of little microplastics in the water, that can get into the gills of fish and prevent them from effectively breathing. And so what is in water also really matters for fish and all the other aquatic organisms that live there. Thank you for your question.
Thanks so much.
All right, we'll swing back your way and see if another freshwater question comes up. I'm going to grab one here from our group in Yellowknife, and they're wondering who started Freshwater Live? Whose idea was Freshwater Live?
So Freshwater Live is a kind of joint initiative that I am the leader behind. So the backstory behind this project is that it's also connected to another project that you're going to learn more about over the course of the next year. That's called the Legacy of Forestry on Freshwaters. And a few years ago, I was doing research. I was trying to figure out what is the impact of formally protecting freshwaters. So what happens to a freshwater body when it's in, for example, a national park or a provincial park versus a freshwater that isn't in a national or provincial park? And as I was doing this project, I was visiting freshwaters that were protected and freshwaters that were unprotected. And I started to notice, like, wow, timber, cutting trees down seems to have a big impact on freshwaters. But it's not really clear how long that impact lasts for. And there doesn't seem to be a ton of good research on that topic. And so from that, I decided, hey, I want to lead a research project that looks at the long-term impacts of cutting down trees or timber harvesting on freshwaters. And for that project, I decided to reach out to National Geographic to get funding to support that project. Myself and Joe Grabowski, the other person that you're seeing here today, have been working with Nat Geo for a long time. And one of the great things about National Geographic is that they love supporting projects with big ideas that are big ideas and that kind of span different fields. And so as we were thinking about doing this research project, we were thinking, hey, like, we don't want to just do research here. Why don't we also think about engaging classrooms with this project? It's such a cool way to get involved with classrooms and to share freshwaters with more. And so when we applied for that initial pot of funding, we mentioned that we wanted to also do this program called Freshwater Live with Classrooms. And then we went and got funding from this new initiative called the Trebek Initiative. Some of you may know Alex Trebek, who used to lead this show called Jeopardy. Some of you probably not, but maybe it's something your teachers could tell you more about. It was like a quiz show that used to happen, I think, either every day or every week. It was quite popular. And this Trebek Initiative is a new initiative that is really trying to help connect Canadians with the geography across the country and learn more about the country. And so we asked them, hey, would you give us funding to support getting 10 classrooms involved with our program to get free water quality monitoring kits to these classrooms so they can help us get more information about water quality? And they said yes to us. So here we are today, now working with you for this year ahead in this Freshwater Live program, which is an initiative that I'm leading, but that has a huge team behind it, including the 3 people that you're going to meet next week at our live event, as well as a long list of like scientists and collaborators that are all found on our Freshwater Live website, which you're going to be looking at in the context of this program a little bit down the line.
All right, let's check in with our crew in Toronto area. 4-5s, do you have some freshwater questions for us?
Yeah, what is microblitzing?
Right, so macro blitzing is the word. And you're right that it sounds a little bit like micro. I think the difference between the words micro and macro is that macro means big and micro means small. And so ironically, like macro, I think it means big, but we're looking at big insects when we macro blitz. So to macro blitz is to go somewhere to a body of fresh water and pick up some rocks, look under them, or swish a net at the bottom of the water and figure out what insects are living in the water there. And then you take pictures of those insects and you upload them to this program called iNaturalist, which is a program that exists on tablets or computers or cell phones. And then all of the information that you collect about insects goes into something called a public database, which is a place where the information that you've collected becomes available to people like myself that are scientists. So basically, to recap, macro blitzing is taking pictures of aquatic insects and sharing those pictures with other people. And I know when I say insects, some of you may be like, ew, or boring, insects suck. But I want to warn you that you are probably going to be quite surprised by your experience collecting insects this year. It is like so surprising. I had no idea until I started using insects for my work, how many insects live in freshwaters. You will be blown away. You will pick up a rock and you will maybe see 100 insects under it in some places. And these insects, if you take a closer look, are actually really, really beautiful. One of the things you could maybe do with your class this year is look up aquatic invertebrates and get some pictures of them, because they're actually pretty fascinating to check out. So I hope that, like me, you kind of develop a love for these insects, because actually they're pretty cool.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to come check in a couple minutes and see if you have another question for us. But I've got a question here from our group in Alberta, and they're wondering, okay. So they're wondering two things. First, they're wondering about fresh water. So, can we always drink fresh water? And then they're wondering about turtles living in fresh water.
Right. So this question about can we drink fresh water is a really important one, because the answer is that sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. And sometimes we maybe could have in the past and we can't anymore, in part because of human actions. So when we do things like put a bunch of pollutants into the water, that could be plastic, or it could be kind of pollution from oil and gas extraction, or it could be even just something as simple as like runoff from an agricultural field. So for example, when we grow plants, we often apply pesticides onto those plants. And when it rains, all the excess pesticides that didn't get uptaken by the plants often find themselves in surrounding water. And so if a freshwater body has things like that happening around it, you probably can't drink the water. It depends on the quality of the water, whether or not you can drink it. If the freshwater body is being properly cared for and everything that's going on around it doesn't include like use of excess pesticides or too many nutrients or different pollutants, then probably you can drink it. One of the things that you're going to be doing this year is using these water quality kits to go out and measure different aspects of water that tell us about its health. And what you'll learn as you do that is that there are some criteria that need to be met for us to be able to safely drink water. So that might be things like, are there bacteria in the water? What is the acidity of the water? Is there a lot of sediment in the water? And you'll see that those criteria are different for different species and uses. So I think drinking fresh water is really a context in which you need the water to be extremely clean of these different potential pollutants. And in other contexts, you might need the water to have a certain quality for fish to be able to thrive there and different things like that.
Okay.
Oh, you also wanted to know about turtles.
Yeah. Do we find turtles maybe in the freshwater?
Yeah, there are definitely lots of species of turtles that exist in freshwaters. I really like geographic turtles or painted turtles. Those are two species that are really fun. Painted turtles, the reason that they call them painted turtles is because when you look under them, their whole stomach is filled with these beautiful colors. Well, I don't know if stomach's the right word actually anatomically, but anyways, their underside is filled with these really beautiful colors. You guys should look them up, painted turtles. And those are an example of a freshwater turtle. You also asked about, can all fish live in freshwater? And the answer is no. Some can and some can't. Some fish can really only live in the ocean. That's the right habitat for them. And I think what's incredible to think about is that different fish live in different freshwaters. So on this topic of water quality, Freshwaters have all kinds of different conditions or a range of conditions. For example, a wetland will often have less oxygen in it than a lake. And the fact that a wetland has less oxygen in it than a lake doesn't mean that that wetland is unhealthy or not a good place. It just means that that wetland, those are the types of conditions that we see there. And so some fish are adapted to those specific conditions, whereas other fish are adapted to different conditions. And that's why sometimes you couldn't take a fish that has been kind of living forever in a wetland where there's very little oxygen and plop it into a different lake. It wouldn't do well at all because it doesn't have the right conditions to do well in.
Okay, we need to take a little trip to Quebec because I know they have some questions there for us. So let's get our Cycle 3 crew in. Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, go ahead, Zoe.
No,
Yes.
fine. Do creatures live in the ocean? No, in the ocean or lakes? I don't know.
What is your
So-
question for?
It was
The same creatures?
Yeah.
Do the same creatures live in the ocean and in lakes?
Yeah, so a question about whether or not the same creatures live in the ocean and lakes. So as I was saying earlier, often species like fish or insects, like specific types of species have adapted to these different habitats. And so some live in the ocean and some live in freshwaters or lakes. There are species of fish like salmon and other migratory fish that move between freshwaters and oceans. And I find that really fascinating to think about, like salmon that can travel thousands of kilometers to get back to the place they were born to themselves lay their own eggs. And what's incredible is how they get there. Like they're using their senses to travel thousands of kilometers and to deal with all kinds of barriers that humans have potentially put into place. So sometimes salmon have to move through dams. They have to move through really murky waters. They make it happen, which I think is just really cool.
My favorite example of that is the bull shark. So bull sharks spend most of their time in the ocean, but the females, the pregnant ones, can go hundreds of miles up rivers and then give birth to their young. So there's certain rivers in places like Australia, Africa. I think even they've found them, decently far up the Mississippi in the past. I don't know if they're still going that far up. So sharks in rivers, which is something that you don't really think about. Here in Canada, though, I don't think there's ever been any reported cases, but pretty neat the way they can go between those two environments. There's not a lot. I think they're the only sharks that can do that, which is pretty cool. Okay, let's grab another question from our group in Northwest Territories. They're wondering if water levels in lakes decrease or fluctuate. Is that okay?
That's a very interesting question. So water levels in lakes do tend to change naturally, not nearly as much as in a reservoir. So a reservoir is like a system that's managed by a dam. And so in reservoirs, which people might often confuse with lakes because they often look a lot like a lake, you'll see these like massive changes in water level going up by a few meters every year, even more than a few meters, and down. And sometimes it might do that multiple times in the year. And that type of dramatic fluctuation of water levels comes with some pretty severe consequences. So what happens when the water levels fluctuate that much is that a lot of the habitat on the edge of the waterway gets stressed. So that the one thing that is really fascinating about waterways is the riparian zone or the littoral zone, which is kind of the zone where land meets water. The section of the water there is actually one of the most important habitats for plants, fish, birds, insects. They really like spending time there, in part because all the plants that grow there provide incredible refuge. So they allow the fish to hide when they're really little before they go out into the bigger parts of the lakes. And so when water levels fluctuate a lot, the quality of that key littoral habitat tends to be compromised. And it sort of prevents plants from aquatic plants from establishing themselves permanently. It prevents insects from being there permanently. And so you end up with a situation where there's less biodiversity than you would find in an area where water levels don't fluctuate a bunch. But there are examples of natural freshwater lakes or systems where the water level does fluctuate, and the system is adapted to that, and so it's not necessarily bad. There is another thing about water level fluctuations. Like whenever a new dam is put into place and we flood an area, so we make a reservoir of water, that tends to do something, which is that it will release something called mercury into the water. And mercury is something that exists. It's natural. It's generally not a big deal, but it does become a big deal if there's too much of it. And when water levels move up and down a lot, or let's say they go from being really low to totally high, that can release mercury, which can be a problem. And so the answer is yes and no to your question. It really depends on the context. Hopefully you have a little bit more of a sense now of all the things that changes in water level might result in, or some of the things.
All right, we'll take another quick trip through our camera classrooms and see if they have some final questions for us. And of course, if our Alberta class wants to add any more, or our Northwest Territories class, they can do so in the chats. So let's go back to our grade 6s, see if we have another freshwater question on deck.
All right. Do we have one more question, Elise? Do you mind coming on up? All right.
Could there be like two different types of species for like one type of animal? Like, could there be a frog that lives in the ocean and like a freshwater body?
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think let's see. So there are many different types of frogs, for example, lots of different types of species of frogs. And usually whether or not they live in the ocean or a freshwater body tends to be quite species specific. You are really piquing my curiosity though. You're making me wonder, are there examples of species, like of one same species that lives both in freshwater or saltwater and can thrive in both those habitats? And I don't know the answer to that question. So I'm going to try and look it up and provide an answer. I'm kind of curious. Theoretically, I think maybe that could happen. There are all kinds of incredible examples of species, of like the same species, existing in very different environments and actually looking really different in one environment from the next. So one really cool freshwater fish example is that there are these freshwater fish that, depending on the conditions of the water body that they're in, they will look totally different. So if they're in a really murky water body where you don't see much, they tend to not have very bright colors because those colors wouldn't really serve them much. No other individuals could see them anyways. Whereas if you put that same species in a body of water that's totally clear, they're going to develop these super bright, beautiful colors that are really important for them to attract other individuals to mate with. And so, I don't know. I'll have to look up your question, or maybe you guys could look it up too and see if you can find an answer.
We're pretty excited that we stumped a scientist. So thank you. It's awesome.
All right, a little freshwater live homework for our classrooms to find out if there's a same species where some of them are just in salt and some are just in freshwater. I like it. Miss Sampson's crew would like to know, is Arctic water that you find in the Arctic, can that be considered freshwater?
Yes, definitely. It depends on where in the Arctic. So, for example, like if you're, a lot of the Arctic regions are on the border of oceans, right? And so they're on the border of various seas or oceans, and that Arctic water is not freshwater. It's saltwater. It's an ocean. It has salt in it. But in the Arctic, there are all kinds of little lakes and streams and freshwaters that flow on the land and that eventually find their way into the ocean. There's also the question of like ice, and is ice freshwater? And I think that, I tend to think of ice as freshwater. These like massive, glaciers, for example, they're not really thought of as a freshwater body, but they can melt and find their ways into like these famous freshwater lakes that are glacier fed. That's quite common, I think, in British Columbia and different parts of Canada, and then maybe even further up north. I think in the Arctic, many glaciers will sort of feed into oceans. And so as the fresh water from the glacier finds its way into the ocean, it starts to mix with that salty water and it becomes not fresh water.
All right. let's check in with our 4-5, see if they have one more freshwater question for us.
What is the rarest and dangerous animal in the freshwater?
Woo, that is a tough question, but an interesting one. I don't have the answer to that. So, what is the rarest freshwater animal? I'm not sure. I suspect it would be a fish that would be kind of, I'm going to shoot a big word at you, endemic to a region. And so you guys can look that word up, but that means like a fish that only lives in one particular place. So there could be, a species of fish from a freshwater body or any other animal that has evolved to really only live in one particular location. And maybe there's like a known population of 5 of them left. And so that's the most rare species there is. So I'm not sure. We'll have to. There's another piece of freshwater live homework, trying to figure out what is the rarest freshwater species that we know of. And I think one thing to think about as we think about answering that question is always adding that we know of, right? Maybe there's an even more rare species that we don't know about, or that no one has ever seen, or that only very few people have seen, but they've never talked to anyone about it. All of the conclusions that we draw and the statements that we make are always limited not only by the information that we have, but the lens that we use. So how we interpret a question and how we think about it. And so that's something to think about as you try and answer these questions. And the most dangerous, I have no idea. Of course, the species that comes to mind is the piranha, because it's famous and it's a freshwater fish, and it has, the story behind it of being able to eat things that are big. But I don't actually know. That would be another piece of homework. And I guess another question is like, how do you define most dangerous? I don't know. Maybe it depends on whose perspective you're asking from. Is that from a human perspective? Is it from a human that's on a boat or swimming? Is it from another fish's perspective? I'm not sure.
All right. So we not too long ago hosted somebody who joined us from Nevada, and she works at a place called Devil's Hole, where there's the Devil's Hole pupfish. And so this is a little fish. It's only found in Nevada in this one cavern. So that's my guess for one that's probably really, really, really rare. But I want to see if any classrooms can find something that's maybe even rarer than that Devil's Hole pupfish. So that's something that you can check out later. Okay, I think we have another question from Alberta. Yeah, and we have more questions. So let's bring in our Quebec class. I think they have another question or two for us.
We're gonna see it. So one of the questions is, what's the biggest fish you can find in freshwaters?
Ooh, that's
I have a
great
guess
question.
at that, but
All right. I don't know. I mean, I'll let I can say that at some time in my life, I was studying a fish called the Nile perch, which is found in East Africa. And I know that our team of researchers once fished a fish that was like literally as tall as I am. I am 5'6". I am not very small, and so that's a really big freshwater fish. But there are probably lots of really big freshwater species. Joe, you might have the answer to that question.
Well, there's two that come to mind for me. One is the sturgeon. The sturgeon, I've seen them diving in rivers sometime. They can live to be really, really old. Some people think more than 100 years, and they can get really big as well. And then I know in Brazil, I don't know if I'm going to say the name right, the arapaima is a freshwater fish that can be over 3 meters long. So those are pretty big fish. Those are two that came to mind to me right away.
Yeah, I think another cool piece of freshwater live homework is to just read about sturgeon. To me, they are one of the most incredible species that exist. This is believed to be one of the oldest living species on the planet. So they're believed to have been here for so long, longer than any other species that we know of. And they look like from another time. They're really cool. So definitely investigate them.
All right.
Would you like to ask your question? Okay, go ahead.
What would the world look like if there was no fresh water?
I can't even imagine a world without fresh water. We are made up of so much fresh water. So is all of our environment and surrounding. And so I think it would look a way that we can't that I can't possibly even imagine. Maybe you can make a drawing of what that might look like. I think there are some other planets that we know of that we don't really know of freshwater on other planets as far as I know. And so I think it would look drastically different. I can say also, like, what would our world look like if we don't take care of freshwaters? It wouldn't be great. We need freshwaters for a lot of things, and so do a lot of species, and all of that is connected. You know, we're living in tandem with all these other species. And so to me, the bottom line is, like, let's take care of freshwaters, and that's part of what we're doing together this year.
All right. One more call for questions. If you have one backstage, you can raise your hand, put one in the chat. But I think we've definitely had a lot of questions. I know I can definitely tell that our students are very interested about what's living in freshwater. That came through in a lot of the questions that we had today. And the different places where we can find freshwater. Those questions came up a lot today as well.
And just thinking about kind of these questions that we've identified as optional freshwater live homework. You know, you don't have to do this homework if you don't want to, but if you want to, I think one of the ways that we could share answers so that other classes can see them is through the email chain that your teachers have going. And so teachers, if your classrooms come up with answers to these questions, please reply all on the thread that we've got started so that we can share answers. And we'll, as a team, sort of think about, is there a way for us to put these questions and answers into a platform that's a little bit more easy to use and access through time as we do these meetings and have different questions come up?
Yeah. All right. Well, shout out to our group in Alberta and our group in Northwest Territories who joined us kind of backstage via the chats. And then let's bring in some of our camera classrooms who are still in here with us for some big waves. Thank you so much, guys, for hanging out with us today and those great, awesome questions. And I think the next time we'll see you, Dalal, myself, Ross, and Jason, will be in Northern Alberta. And that'll be pretty cool to come to you from some really cool freshwater, some forests, some maybe more northern wild part of Canada. It'll be fun to connect with you guys from there. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. See you soon.
All right. Thanks, Dalal. We'll see you soon, too.
Yeah. Bye.